Perfect, Katie. Thank you. You're all very welcome back to the second in our series of seminars on burnout. This week, you'll have to just forgive me. I normally have one of my colleagues with me helps manage the waiting room. So if you see me getting temporarily distracted, it's because I'm letting people in from the waiting room. So bear with me on that one. So last week, we did a basic introduction to what burnout is and how to recognize it. And in this seminar today, we're going to talk a little bit about one specific way in which burnout affects you, and that is uh, affecting cognitive function or how you think. We There are lots of different misconceptions about it, about what burnout is, what burnout isn't, and last week we elucidated the fact that it's the end of a long process that has predictable steps on the way. So we're going to talk about how it affects the way you think, and a lot of the experiences are remarkably banal and remarkably just day to day, and you can often attribute them in their singularity to just having a tough day. So many people will recognize things like losing your train of thought, forgetting conversations, increased forgetfulness, mental slowing, reading something repeatedly, struggling to make decisions. These are all things that, yes, certainly they are the kinds of things that come and go. Sometimes then we put them down to the individual domain. So you might say, for instance, I'm just not coping. I'm just not managing, or I've got a problem with my memory. But we're beginning to understand that it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. So we know that burnout isn't just about exhaustion, but there are changes in the way you pay attention, the way your memory works, your processing speed. Basically, burnout affects not only how you feel, but also how you think. And one of the most reassuring findings, I guess we should get this in at the beginning about burnout, is that these cognitive difficulties obviously aren't related to intelligence, but they appear when your brain is operating under this kind of prolonged, relentless strain, where the demands that are placed on you are much greater than the resources that you can bring to bear on a particular situation. So you remember last week we said it's not just exhaustion; it also includes cynicism, reduced effectiveness, and that's how you feel or how you think or how effective you think you are being, and as well then obviously these cognitive difficulties which we're going to talk through today. The first one that's easy to spot is problems with attention. So people people who experience burnout are often high performing or are used to doing well. They're used to finding things that are finding things relatively easy or being admired by their peers. And often one of the things people find is that their attention begins to wane or they become a bit more distractible, have difficulty focusing, or have this problem with kind of mental drifting. And they find that unusual and unsettling. And of course, it's natural then to think that this broad difficulty in sustaining attention is a problem with just my attention. And particularly now, it's easy to put that down to mobile phone or social media or not enough sleep or whatever. But we can begin to understand this if we take it out of its singularity and put it into the context of increasing demands. We can begin to start thinking about this as one of the components of burnout. Now, again, we have to think and we have to be kind of nuanced about this, that having problems with attention doesn't necessarily mean you're on the way to burnout, but it's one of these things that begins to happen and it gathers momentum and it gathers in other symptoms in alongside it. Then, of course, you can think about attention as the mechanism by which we get information into our memory. And then people have attention problems and you begin to forget things or become a little bit sort of disorganized about things and where things are and calendars and whatnot. And again, like attention, you tend to think, okay, well, maybe I'm just having a problem with my memory. And particularly burnout has been shown to affect short-term memory or that working memory, remembering recent things, having this kind of sense of going round and round and round in the short term and forgetting. And that can have a really detrimental effect, again, on just day-to-day functioning. And that can begin to pile up. It's not evidence of dementia. I mean, I know that goes without saying, but I think it's useful to say it in any event. It generally affects what you might call a cognitive overload. So we go back to that idea that burnout results from that mismatch between the demands that are placed on you and the resources or the coping or the recovery resources that are available to you. The next thing is a bit more subtle. It's this idea of processing speed, how quickly you can do things. And people often say, I just feel a bit slowed down. A phrase that people sometimes use is mental fog. You get this idea of, oh, I just can't really get to grips with things the way I used to. And things take longer than you would normally have, that they would normally have taken before that. And really interesting one is this idea of being indecisive. People who are typically decisive become indecisive or find it difficult to make simple decisions. And I think something to stress here, again, it's not absolutely necessary phenomenon, but something that people notice is a change from their baseline. Is I was never like this before, and now I'm seeing it. And again, something we touched on last week was the idea that you will often hear this from other people first. Other people will begin to notice it. And of course, we are stressed and we're exhausted and we have all of these demands. And we can often put that aside and say, well, that, they don't know what they're talking about, or they're just being a little bit difficult. So you might remember that concept of cynicism. And we can broadly put all of these things into what one might describe as executive function. So these are the things, they're prefrontal cortex activities. They're the things that separate us from other mammalian species. Not that other mammalian species can't do them, but we particularly excel at things like planning, organizing, prioritizing, switching between tasks and making decisions. Of course, everybody does that. One really interesting one there is this idea of switching between tasks. We like to think about multitasking as a phenomenon. The evidence would tell us that multitasking is not really possible. But what is possible is to switch from one task to another. And as we are busy, that does not only mean, by the way, busy at work, busy in life. When you've got multiple demands on your time and on your resources and on your capacity, having to switch between those always has a cost. Often we can bear that cost in the normal run of things, but you find when your mental load increases, you get exhausted, you get these cognitive, attentional memory issues. You begin to find then that task switching becomes a big issue, and you get this kind of drag throughout your day. These are the kinds of things that are particularly vulnerable with burnout, and they bring with them then, and I don't want to go into this too much today, an emotional cost, because we then start to get frustrated with ourselves. And something when I speak to people about burnout, they mention often is this idea of big things, small tasks feeling big. So ordinary, simple, what you might describe as simple tasks, become really, really difficult. The cognitive effort required to maintain basic simple functions. This might be something like doing your online shopping, for instance, a simple small task, or organizing a team meeting. It's things that are easy, straightforward, but they gather this momentum in your head and they become increasingly difficult to manage, and they feel bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, that becomes cumulative because they mount on top of each other. I know this goes without saying, but I think it's worth pointing it out anyway. People feel often when they're in the throes of this process, they feel like you're kind of losing your marbles or you're losing your intelligence, because of course we link our intelligence in particular to our job or to our capacity to do things or our capacity to be organized or always being the one who's able to do X, Y, and Z. And we kind of peg intelligence to that. And when those functions begin to suffer, we of course then look at the base of that and say, there must be something inherently wrong with me, and I am having this particular issue from which I cannot recover. We know that burnout is definitely related to or includes problems of cognitive function. But the key thing is you manage the burnout, then you manage the recovery, you manage all these cognitive processes, intelligence, whatnot. They all just restore themselves generally back to your baseline. Which again reminds us of it's just about noting a change from baseline to where you might find yourself right now. So then it's useful. We want to try and get to the point of saying, okay, well, is this happening to me? What's my change from baseline? So it's useful to take a second for yourself, and you can even jot these down or screenshot the slide or whatever. Have you noticed these things? So reduced concentration, increased forgetfulness, difficulty making decisions, mentally slowing. They might be signs that your cognitive resources are under strain. And there's a great phrase in politics that there are no votes in prevention. What we're trying to do with series like this, specifically and more broadly, is we're trying to help people to recognize things earlier, recognize things in some sort of a structured way where we can arrest a particular move towards a particular issue like burnout. So it's worth taking a few moments over the next couple of hours, if you have the time, or the next few days. Think about, what's my concentration like now and what used to be like? Am I more forgetful than I used to be? Am I having difficulty making decisions? And look, life throws all sorts of issues at us. But what we're looking at is an overall pattern. We've got postpartum changes. We've got age-related changes. We've got changes in you move house or you move jobs, or a baby comes along, whatever it might be. All these things, of course, affect cognitive function. But it's worth trying to structure it out and say, what's my concentration, forgetfulness, difficulty making decisions, mental slowing? Are these part of a broader picture? Do I feel this, like we mentioned the last day, cynicism appearing? Do I feel that the whatever resources I can muster don't seem to be able to help me to manage in a way that I used to be able to manage before? And is there the sense that even as I rest, I don't feel, there doesn't seem to be any restoration from that? So I'm leading down this road of exhaustion with these cognitive difficulties becoming part of that. So we want to make sure that when people are leaving these very brief little sessions, whether you're munching on a sandwich or you're catching up on some of the laundry over lunch or whatever it might be, we want to be clear that burnout is not just a phenomenon of mood, as we often think about people being erratic or people being really angry or upset or depressed. And it's not, and also it's not just a problem with what you might broadly term energy. It's not just about being exhausted. We're very clear on that the last day. It's not about being exhausted. It has effects on the way you think about the world. And of course, the ultimate catch-22 about mental health in general, and something like burnout specifically, is that the very organ that is affected, i.e. your brain, the structure of that, the mechanisms of that, the cognitive facilities that it has, they are the very things that are affected by burnout, that are affected by these cognitive difficulties of attention, memory, processing speed, decision-making, and planning. These kind of things that make everyday life feel harder. The organ you need to recognize that is the organ that's affected. The functions you need to recognize that are the functions that are affected by that. So this again is, as John F. Kennedy said, the time to fix the hole in the roof is when the sun is shining. This is trying to find an opportunity for yourself, if you can, to try and lay down a marker, give yourself a baseline, or try and understand, where am I at now on these few domains compared to where I was, if you can feel this thing is beginning to happen. Or even better, and this was evident when we talked about cynicism, it's useful to have somebody who knows you, to ask them, listen to what people are saying, that maybe you are not the same person you used to be. And remember, with cynicism, again, the catch-22 is, when somebody is telling you you're being cynical, part of the cynicism is they're just being difficult. So it's worth, if we can in a moment, try and find a little bit of solid ground on which we can say to ourselves, okay, are these things happening to me? Am I becoming more cynical? Am I having these cognitive function problems? And could this be part of a broader mechanism by which burnout might be just getting a little bit of a hold? So we always like to finish with 3 things to remember, because again, we have a lot of information in our lives. Everybody's getting information from all over the place, and we're all multitasking. And I'll be fairly certain. And of course, people don't turn on the cameras and because somebody's grabbing a sandwich, or somebody, as I say, is catching up on the laundry and maybe listening on headphones or whatever it might be. What we're always trying to get across is, what are the 3 things we can remember from today? Number 1, burnout affects the way you think. It's not just about energy. It's not just about exhaustion. Difficulty with attention, memory, concentration, focus, planning, organization, all those things that make us uniquely human, they begin to suffer. And they are a recognized part of the way of what burnout is. It's reflected in the literature, and it's reflected in the way the World Health Organization recognizes burnout as an occupational hazard. And the message of hope, I suppose, from all of that is that these changes are generally reversible, because it is this very slow process that is driven by mechanisms which are relatively clear. And once we can begin to undo that, one can again return back to the baseline. So again, if you're only going to screenshot one thing, it's these 3 things to remember about burnout as an occupational phenomenon, and something that is quite readily reversible. So I'm going to leave it there. We've had a good solid 17 minutes there. I just want to bring your attention to the one we're going to do next week. It's the idea of outside emotional responses to minor inconveniences. So we're going to get a little bit further into the neuroscience now, a little bit further into understanding the mechanisms of how these things actually work, and why. Again, other people will recognize this, and you sometimes recognize it in yourself, how small things like a small criticism or a look from somebody in a meeting or a sigh from a teenager, how these kinds of things can actually get bigger and bigger and bigger. And they're bigger than the event itself. So just before we go, I see we have 2 messages in the chat. I'm going to see if I can just bear with me while I read them. Curious to know what the general pattern of self-talk might be with personalities that experience burnout. Has there always been an element of imposter syndrome there, which exacerbates when too many things come in and are unmanageable? It's a really interesting question. And can burnout be caused by thinking or overthinking? I mean, these are really, really interesting questions. And I got a few questions by email last week, and one particularly on neurodiversity and burnout. And what I think I'm going to do is, as we go through the series, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to take these questions and make and address them all in with a little bit of research and a couple of slides as we move forward. So rather than try and getting directly into it now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them into a kind of a Q&A, and we'll again be putting this up onto YouTube, and then we'll be sending out a little summary that'll go to everybody's email. So with that, we have that's 18 minutes done, and I think that's probably as good a time as any. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. So it's as good a time as any to pause there. Now that I've paused it, I can see that people have their cameras on. Thank you for that. I'm not the only one with the camera on. Thank you. I couldn't see anything there. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for attending. I appreciate it's lunchtime. We'll continue again next week. You'll get the email with the invite and with all of the updates and its summary and everything like that will be in there. You all should have access to my email as well. If anybody's got any burning questions, please pop them into an email. We're more than happy to receive them. I also have on the very briefly, I'm conscious that we're at 19 minutes. Very briefly, I've put my Instagram handle up there, and not something I'm particularly useful at, but I've been drawn into doing videos for Instagram to try and dispel some of these myths around mental health. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of poor quality information. So with some videos on Instagram, I'm really trying to kind of set the balance a little bit more correctly with that. So on that note, thank you everybody for coming along, for attending, for your attention, for turning on your cameras now that I can see everybody. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.